I have attended more banquets than I can honestly count. In 40 years of the silk trade, I sat at a great many long tables and listened to a great many musicians perform between the courses, and I will tell you plainly that I retained almost none of it. Music at a banquet is furniture. You hear it, the way you hear the clink of serving trays. That is simply the truth of the thing. I tell you this so you understand what it meant when I could not hear anything else. The Longhua Pavilion was the finest banquet hall on the river that season. 3 tiers of lacquered wood and lantern light, the smell of osmanthus drifting in from the courtyard, and a guest list that included every merchant of consequence in the city, plus one celebrated visitor from the capital, Maestro Feng. He directed the conservatory there, or had recently. I was never entirely clear on the distinction, and he was the kind of man who carried his own importance like a second coat. Broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed, very loud about the things he liked and quieter, but more pointed about the things he did not. He had been talking about the city's musical poverty since the soup course. The piano stood in the far corner of the lower tier, a lacquered upright that the pavilion had owned for years. It was kept in reasonable tune and used, as such instruments at such establishment generally are, to provide neutral color between the louder moments of an evening. The girl who managed the table nearest it, taking orders, clearing cups, refilling the small porcelain pots of tea with the brisk, unhurried competence of someone who had done it 10,000 times, was perhaps 25. Plain blue jacket, hair pinned back. I had noticed her only because she was efficient and because my seat put me close enough to the corner that I could see the piano and the space around it clearly. Maestro Feng noticed too, though for a different reason. He had been speaking loudly about the absence of any tasteful musical accompaniment, and when one of his table companions pointed at the upright and suggested perhaps something might be arranged, the maestro looked around the room with the expression of a man deciding which problem to solve with the least expenditure of his own energy. His gaze found the girl refilling a pot of longjing 2 tables from the piano. "You," he said, not unkindly. "The way you say it to anyone you have not bothered to distinguish from the furniture. Play something for us. Something light. Something forgettable. Just enough to fill the air." She stopped. Set the teapot with great care, looked at him steadily for a moment. I remember that look. I have thought about it many times since, and said in the quietest voice, "Of course." The nearest tables watched with mild interest, the way you watch a minor diversion while waiting for the next course. A few smiled. A woman across the room murmured something to her companion and they both laughed. And the sound carried in that particular way that laughter does when it is aimed somewhere. I was watching her face when she sat down at the bench. She adjusted it. 2 inches back, then 1 inch forward. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment before she placed them on the keys, and that pause, that single, deliberate pause, was the first thing that made me set down my cup. Then she began. The opening of the Chopin Ballade in A-flat is deceptive. It starts with one long, low questioning note, a kind of summons, and then a melody so unguarded, so nakedly plain, that if you are not listening carefully, you might think it is still furniture. The left hand is doing something beneath it, a restless, patient pulse, and by the time the melody curves back on itself and reaches for the upper register, something has happened to the air, in a room. You cannot name it. You only know the room is different. The table nearest the piano went quiet first. A man in a good suit lowered his chopsticks. His wife turned her head. Then the next table, then the one beyond that, the silence moving outward from the corner, the way the ring moves out from a stone, dropped into still water, steady and unstoppable. Maestro Feng was still talking when the silence reached him. He stopped mid-sentence. He turned. He did not say anything further. I had heard the ballade before, though not like this. What she was doing with the middle section, the place where Chopin's original tiers itself, was something I had no category for. The left hand held the floor with absolute certainty, while the right hand reached so far into the upper register that the notes seemed to come from somewhere above the room rather than from the instrument in the corner. The strings of the old upright rang in ways I did not know they could. Several people near me had stopped breathing in the particular way you stop, breathing not out of tension but out of something closer to prayer. Then she moved. She did not announce it. There was no pause, no break, no signal. The Chopin simply opened, the way a river opens when it meets a wider water, and out of that opening came something else. Something I could not name, in the sense that it carried no title I knew, and resembled no composer I could catalog, but which I recognized in the way you recognize your own mother's handwriting. It was rooted in the old river songs, the plain-spoken melodies that the boatmen used to carry up and down this stretch of water 2 generations ago, before the city got loud. I had not heard those songs since my father's time. I had not known I still carried them. The woman who had laughed put her hand over her mouth. The melody moved simply at first. The left hand, barely a murmur. The right hand following the line of the song, the way you follow a path you walked. In childhood, carefully, relearning each curve. Then it opened further, the harmony beneath it thickening, deepening. The old song becoming something the old song had always been reaching toward, but never had the architecture to find. 4 notes in the middle of it. 4 notes, a descending phrase, that did something to my chest I am not able to describe to you, properly, an old grief, I think. The kind you did not know was grief until music named it. Maestro Feng's hands were still on the tablecloth, could see them from where I sat. They were perfectly flat. She brought it down slowly. The melody returned to its simplest form, single right-hand line, barely above a whisper, and then she held the last note just long enough to let it decay entirely on its own, rather than letting the pedal carry it. And then she lifted her hands and placed them back in her lap, exactly as they had been before she began. The room was silent, I mean genuinely silent. 60 people in a banquet hall, and not one of them made a sound. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds, which is longer than it seems when you are inside it. Then the applause came. Not the polite rhythmic applause of an audience following a cue, the sudden, disorganized applause of people who have forgotten they were supposed to be eating dinner, who have been somewhere else entirely, and are only now returning. She did not stand. She did not turn to face them. She simply sat with her hands in her lap, while the sound went on around her, looking at the keys the way you look at something, after it has given you everything it had. Maestro Feng stood. I watched him do it. He was not a man who did things impulsively. He had the air of someone who decided everything in advance. And yet he rose from his chair in what, very much like an involuntary motion, the way you stand when the body moves before the mind has caught up. He did not applaud immediately. He stood for a moment, his hands at his sides, looking at the corner of the room with an expression I can only call reckoning. Then he began to applaud, and it was slow and deliberate. The kind of applause that is not enthusiasm but acknowledgement. In a man like that is a more serious thing. He finally turned. She looked at the room without surprise, or with the kind of composure that is indistinguishable from it. She inclined her head, just slightly, the small bow of someone who has done the work and knows it. And then she stood, pushed the bench back into place, picked up the teapot she had set down on the side table, and returned to her rounds. I watched her refill 3 cups before I remembered I was holding mine. I have told this story many times over the years, and people always ask me what became of her, and I have to tell them I do not know. I never learned her name. I left the pavilion that night without thinking to ask, which is a regret I carry cleanly and without excuse. What I know is this. The maestro asked for something forgettable, and she gave him something none of us in that room has been able to put down in the 30 years since. She played it as though it cost her nothing. Perhaps for her it didn't. That is what I think about when I think about what it means to carry something that a room cannot see. She understood something about concealment that I have spent 30 years trying to put into words. Not the hiding of a thing. She was not hiding anything, not exactly, but the understanding that a thing carried quietly is not a thing diminished. The old escort men used to say that the most dangerous cargo was the cargo no one thought to guard. I did not understand that saying until the night I watched a girl, in a plain blue jacket, set down a teapot and give a roomful of merchants the one night none of them would ever fully lose. She played the song all the way through, and she played it for no one's approval, and that is the whole of it. I have been to the Longhua Pavilion twice since that evening. The upright piano still stands in the corner. They have had it retuned. On my most recent visit, I arrived early and sat in the seat nearest it, the same seat I had that night, And I watched the room fill with the usual crowd of merchants and their guests, all of them loud and important, and not yet listening to anything. I ordered a pot of longjing. A young man in a white jacket came to fill it, pleasant and brisk and competent, and I watched him and thought, any of them, any one of them, you cannot hear it coming. You will not know until the music begins. That is the only lesson the evening ever taught me, and 30 years later I find I am still learning it.